Imagine walking into a room feeling a little anxious, maybe because of a long day at work or a looming problem you haven't solved yet. Your dog notices immediately. They approach you, perhaps nudging your hand, sitting close, or just resting their head on your lap. Somehow, they know how you feel. Somehow, they understand your mood in a way that seems almost magical. But it's not magic. What your dog is doing is remarkable, but it's grounded in biology, physics, and thousands of years of evolution. Emotions at their core are physical processes. They are not floating clouds of vague feeling. When you feel anxious, your heart rate changes, your breathing shifts, your muscles tense, and your skin releases chemicals into the air and onto your sweat. Your body is a signal machine constantly broadcasting your inner state. Dogs are exceptional at reading these signals. Their noses are not just better than ours, they are in a completely different league. Humans have around 5 million olfactory receptors. Dogs have approximately 220 million. That means a single sniff to a dog can reveal subtle chemical changes in your body, changes that indicate stress, excitement, or fear. Dogs do not need to know what cortisol is. They simply notice the pattern when you produce this chemical. Something in your behavior or smell changes, and that pattern tells them how you feel. But scent is only part of the story. Dogs are also masters of subtle observation. They notice micro-expressions, tiny movements of the eyes, shifts in posture, the barely perceptible tension in your shoulders. These are signals we humans often don't even realize we are giving off. To us, it seems like our dog can read our minds, but in reality, they are reading our bodies. Every twitch, every blink, every little adjustment is data, and dogs are incredibly good at interpreting it. Think about learning to read clouds. At first, they are just shapes in the sky. But if you watch enough, you start to see patterns. Cirrus clouds mean fair weather. Cumulonimbus clouds signal a storm. Dogs do something similar, but with humans. They read emotional patterns in our voices, faces, and movements. They watch, they remember, and they respond. Over thousands of years of living alongside humans, dogs have become experts at noticing patterns that matter for their survival, their comfort, and their relationships. The fascinating part is that this skill is not just learned, it is partly evolved. The early dogs who were best at sensing human moods were more likely to be cared for, fed, and protected. Those who could not read humans were less likely to survive. Over tens of thousands of years, this created a species exquisitely tuned to human emotion, capable of noticing signals we do not consciously send. When a dog senses your sadness or joy, it is not a guess. It is the result of an evolutionary process, a finely honed ability to perceive and respond to patterns in human behavior and physiology. This ability to read emotion so accurately makes dogs unique among animals. They bridge the gap between human and non-human perception, existing in a sensory world that overlaps ours in remarkable ways. They remind us that there is more to the universe than what we can see and hear, and that intelligence, sensitivity, and understanding can take forms far stranger and more beautiful than language or conscious thought. To understand how dogs can read our emotions, we have to step back in time tens of thousands of years to the moment when humans and dogs first began living together. Imagine a hunter-gatherer world where survival depended on cooperation, alertness, and trust. Wolves and humans crossed paths, and something remarkable began to happen. The wolves that were less fearful, more attentive, and better at noticing human signals were tolerated, fed, and allowed to stay close. The wolves that were aggressive or oblivious were driven away or didn't survive. Over generations, this created a subtle but profound change. A species of wolf began evolving into what we now know as the domestic dog, shaped by the human world, and in turn, shaping it in return. This process is called co-evolution. Humans selected for dogs that could read emotions, and dogs selected for humans who were responsive to them. Imagine an invisible feedback loop stretching over thousands of years. A dog that could sense fear or anger would avoid danger, protect its human, or seek comfort. A human who recognized and responded to the dog's signals would ensure the dog's loyalty and survival. Over countless generations, This feedback loop amplified the traits that made emotional reading possible. Dogs became fine-tuned mirrors of our feelings, instinctively tuned into patterns that we ourselves barely notice. Think about it this way: in the wild, survival is about noticing patterns. Wolves read the mood of the pack, the shifts in wind direction, the tracks of prey. When wolves became dogs, they began reading humans instead of other wolves. The signals were different: facial expressions instead of snarls, tone of voice instead of growls, movement patterns instead of pouncing cues, but the principle was the same. Dogs who could interpret human cues survived and passed on their genes. But it's not just about survival, it's about communication. Humans and dogs developed a nonverbal dialogue that we are only beginning to understand. Eye contact, posture, gestures, tone, and smell all became part of a shared language that exists between species. A tilt of the head, a flick of the ear, a wag of the tail, all our responses to subtle human cues signal what we feel and what we might do next. In a sense, dogs became emotional translators, bridging the gap between human thought and canine perception. Coevolution also explains why dogs are unique among domestic animals in their emotional intelligence. Cats, horses, and other domesticated animals are sensitive to humans to varying degrees, but dogs live in an almost continuous loop with us, influenced by our moods and shaping our behavior in return. This is why even a casual glance at your dog can feel like a conversation. They don't use words, yet they are constantly interpreting and predicting your internal state. They anticipate fear, happiness, anxiety, and excitement, and respond in ways that help maintain the bond. What's remarkable is that this process is both ancient and ongoing. Even today, when you come home stressed from work, your dog reacts before you speak. They are not consciously analyzing your hormones or facial expressions. They are responding to patterns that have been reinforced over tens of thousands of years. Every interaction between humans and dogs today is a continuation of this co-evolutionary story, written into behavior, instincts, and perception. Dogs are living proof that evolution is not only about survival of the fittest, but also about survival of the sensitive, the attentive, and the relational. Their ability to read human emotion is a product of biology history and thousands of years of shared experience. In watching them, we see the traces of an ancient partnership, one that reminds us that connection, sensitive, attentive, and mutual, has been a driving force in shaping minds both human and canine. So how do dogs actually read our emotions in real time? It's one thing to talk about evolution and co-adaptation, but science gives us a window into what's happening moment by moment. Studies with dogs reveal that they are not just passive observers. They are actively monitoring, interpreting, and responding to human cues, sometimes even before we are aware of them ourselves. One of the most fascinating experiments measured dogs' heart rates alongside those of their owners. When the owner was stressed or anxious, the dog's heart rate increased almost immediately. When the owner was calm, the dog's heart rate stayed steady. It's as if the dog's body was mirroring ours, tracking subtle physiological signals that we might assume are invisible. But they are not invisible to a dog. Changes in breathing, posture, muscle tension, and even pheromones are all cues, and dogs have evolved to read them instinctively. Facial expressions are another important signal. Dogs can distinguish a happy face from an angry face. Even in photographs, they do not understand a smile in the way humans do. They simply notice a combination of features and patterns and associate them with outcomes. A smiling human often means petting, play, or a gentle tone of voice. An angry face often predicts a raised voice or sudden movement. Dogs learn these patterns and respond accordingly, which is why they can appear almost telepathic in understanding our moods. Tone of voice is yet another channel. Dogs are extraordinarily sensitive to pitch cadence and emotional inflection. A high-pitched, playful tone signals safety and fun. A low, sharp tone signals caution or displeasure. They don't need language. They read patterns in sound, just as they read patterns in smell or movement. Over time, this makes them predictive. They don't just react to what is happening. They anticipate what might happen next based on the signals we emit. It's important to understand that this is not simply learned behavior like a trick or command. Dogs do learn associations, certainly, Sitting when you say sit, coming when called, but reading emotions is far more complex. It requires integration across multiple senses, rapid assessment of subtle patterns, and the ability to act appropriately. Essentially, a dog is running a real-time, unconscious computation of your emotional state, combining smell, vision, sound, and touch to create a coherent picture of how you feel. Think about this in human terms. If you walked into a room and could instantly sense everyone's stress levels, happiness, or fear, you could navigate social situations effortlessly. You could comfort those who are anxious, avoid conflict with the angry, and encourage the joyful. That is exactly what dogs are doing with us, except they do it without conscious reasoning. Their brains process thousands of signals simultaneously, many too subtle for humans to notice, and produce a response that feels intuitive and empathetic. Some scientists even suggest that dogs' brains have specialized regions that respond to human emotional cues, particularly the voice and face, and that the amygdala, the area associated with emotional processing, is highly active when dogs observe human emotion. We can measure the patterns, but we cannot access the subjective experience of a dog. We can see the reaction, but we cannot feel the perception behind it. And perhaps that's the most intriguing part. Dogs inhabit a sensory world that overlaps with ours but also extends beyond it, allowing them to perceive reality in ways we can barely imagine. Every time your dog senses your anxiety, mirrors your excitement, or nudges you when you are sad, it is the result of an intricate, real-time interpretation of your internal state. It is instinct, evolution, and learning all working together in a continuous flow. This is why their understanding feels almost magical. It isn't magic. It's biology, history, and extraordinary perceptual ability acting in concert. Even though we can measure some of what dogs are sensing, we still don't fully understand how they process it. We know certain regions of the canine brain respond to human voices, faces, and gestures. We know that the amygdala, the part of the brain associated with emotion, is highly active when dogs observe human moods. We know they can mirror our heart rate and respond predictively to our emotional signals. But what it feels like to be a dog reading your fear, your excitement, or your sadness is beyond human understanding. We can track patterns, record behavior, measure chemistry, but the subjective experience, the inner perception of a dog, remains hidden. Humans struggle to explain this because our minds are built to interpret the world through language, logic, and our limited sensory perception. We understand emotions by talking, labeling, and reasoning. Dogs operate on a combination of instinct, sensory input, and learned associations. Attempting to translate their experience into human terms is like trying to explain color to someone who has been blind from birth. We can describe wavelength, brightness, and contrast, but we cannot convey the experience. Similarly, we can describe a dog detecting cortisol or noticing a subtle micro-expression, but the sensation and perception behind it remain entirely alien to us. Imagine for a moment that you wake up one day with entirely new senses. You can hear electromagnetic fields, see magnetic lines, and smell the electrical impulses of living beings. To you, the world is completely transformed. Everyday objects now carry invisible signals, and subtle changes in your environment are instantly perceptible. You would struggle to explain your new perception to someone with ordinary senses. You might be able to map it, predict patterns, and even respond to it intelligently, but the raw experience itself would be ineffable. This is exactly the situation we face when trying to understand dogs. Their sensory universe overlaps ours, but it also extends into realms we cannot naturally perceive. Their understanding of humans is immediate, predictive, and accurate, yet it is built on a world that is fundamentally different from our own. We often assume that intelligence and awareness must look like our own. We imagine thinking, reasoning, and labeling as the benchmarks for understanding, but dogs demonstrate that perceptual sensitivity can be a different, equally sophisticated form of intelligence. They integrate multisensory data, smell, vision, touch, hearing, and convert it into responses that match the world around them. It is an intelligence without words, yet it is deeply effective and astonishingly precise. Another challenge is that dogs' perceptions are relational. They do not experience the world in isolation. Their interpretation of your emotions depends on context, past experiences, and the subtle patterns they have learned over time. Even if we could map all the signals in a laboratory, we might fail to recreate the relational dimension, the continuous feedback loop that makes their understanding so reliable. This adds another layer of mystery, showing us that perception is not just about raw data, it is about context, memory, and relationship. Every time a dog responds to our emotions, it reminds us of how limited our perspective is. We can study, observe, and measure, yet we encounter phenomena that exceed our full comprehension. The precision, subtlety, and relational depth of a dog's perception demonstrate that understanding can exist in forms entirely alien to human consciousness. The gap between what we can measure and what we can truly know is not a flaw of science, it is a window into the richness of reality beyond our senses. What makes the connection between humans and dogs even more fascinating is that it is not one-sided. Dogs rid our emotions, yes, but they also influence them. The interaction between human and dog is a continuous feedback loop, a conversation without words, a silent dance of signals and responses. When you pet a dog, for example, your body responds in measurable ways. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, rises while cortisol, the stress hormone, drops. Your blood pressure lowers, your heart rate slows, and even your mood lifts. The dog senses this shift, responding in turn, reinforcing the emotional exchange. This is not magic or anthropomorphism. It is biology and chemistry in action. Imagine it as a two-way mirror of emotions. You feel anxious, the dog senses it and approaches, offering comfort or gentle attention. Their presence in turn calms you, which signals to the dog that their action was successful. Over time, this creates a finely tuned, ongoing exchange of emotional cues. The dog learns that certain behaviors ease human tension, and humans learn that the dog's presence and gestures have real calming effects. This is relational intelligence at its most fundamental level, a feedback system that evolves with experience and history. Humans often assume that intelligence must resemble conscious thought or verbal reasoning, but dogs teach us that sensitivity, attentiveness, and pattern recognition can be a form of intelligence in themselves. Dogs do not label emotions as anger or happiness in the way humans do. They do not theorize or analyze. Instead, they detect subtle physical, chemical, and auditory signals, integrate them in real time, and respond appropriately. In effect, dogs are continuously calculating a model of your internal state, predicting what you are likely to do next, and acting in ways that maintain harmony and safety in the shared environment. Think about this for a moment in human terms. If you could instantly detect the emotional state of every person in a room, fear, excitement, sadness, you could interact far more effectively than anyone else. You could avoid conflict, provide comfort, or encourage joy with remarkable precision. Dogs do this with humans, but they do it effortlessly and without conscious reasoning. Their computation is instinctive, shaped by evolution, early socialization, and experience, yet it rivals the predictive abilities we associate with deliberate thought. This two-way interaction also shows why dogs are such powerful companions for therapy, service work, and emotional support. They do not just react to us, they guide our emotions, often without us realizing it. A dog's calm presence can regulate a human's stress, anxiety, or even depression. Conversely, a human's emotions can trigger playful, protective, or comforting behaviors in a dog. It is a dynamic, mutual relationship, a living example of co-adaptation in action. The relationship challenges our assumptions about the boundaries of mind. Humans are used to thinking of cognition and perception as individual, contained within the skull. Yet here is a clear example of distributed awareness. One being perceives, another responds, influences, and adapts, creating a shared space of emotion and understanding. Reality, in this sense, is not confined to individual experience. It exists in the interactions between beings, in the subtle, continuous exchange of signals and responses that define life itself. Every moment with a dog is a small experiment in relational intelligence. Every nudge, glance, or tail wag is part of an ongoing dialogue that demonstrates sensitivity, prediction, and understanding. The connection between humans and dogs reminds us that perception is not just a solitary phenomenon. It is relational, embodied, and interactive. extending the reach of consciousness beyond ourselves into the living world around us. When we watch a dog respond to our emotions, we start to notice something profound. The boundaries we take for granted between mind and matter, self and other, observer and observed, begin to blur. Science often teaches us to separate the subject from the object, the thinker from the world. But when a dog nudges you, sits beside you, or stares intently at your face, that separation dissolves. Your internal state affects the dog's behavior, which in turn affects your state. You are no longer merely an isolated observer of the world. You are part of a continuous, living loop of interaction. Think about a moment when you were upset and your dog came to you. Maybe you didn't say a word, yet their behavior mirrored your mood. Their calm presence might have eased your tension, which then signaled to them that you were less anxious, completing a feedback cycle that neither of you consciously controlled. This dynamic is not a simple cause and effect chain. It is a network of mutual influence. Your emotions, your body language, your subtle chemical signals, and your dog's instincts and perceptions all intersect, forming a shared emotional space. Dogs challenge the way we define intelligence and awareness. Human thinking is language-driven, analytical, and introspective. Dogs' understanding is relational, embodied, and immediate. They integrate multisensory inputs and respond adaptively, often anticipating our reactions before we act. Their intelligence is not measured in logic puzzles or abstract reasoning, but in sensitivity and attunement. It is the ability to perceive patterns, predict outcomes, and navigate a shared reality with remarkable precision. In a sense, dogs remind us that consciousness and understanding are not confined to human cognition. They emerge in relationships and interactions as much as in individual brains. Consider how this reframes the way we perceive reality. We tend to think of the universe as composed of separate objects, each with its own existence, each observed and understood independently. But the emotional bond with a dog suggests that experience can be distributed. Awareness is not merely inside your skull. It exists in the interplay between you and other sentient beings. When your dog senses your joy or fear, and you feel their response, reality itself becomes relational, woven from patterns of interaction rather than isolated entities. This insight has philosophical weight grounded in science. It shows us that perception, understanding, and intelligence are not just personal, they are emergent properties of connection. A dog's perception of your mood, their ability to respond, and your response to them together create a small, living ecosystem of awareness. It is a reminder that mind is not strictly bound by anatomy, that intelligence is not a measure of language or abstract thought, and that reality is richer than what we can measure with instruments or define with equations. Watching a dog attuned to human emotion also teaches patience, curiosity, and humility. They navigate a world far more complex than ours with an elegance we can barely replicate. Their sensitivity forces us to reconsider our assumptions about awareness, consciousness, and the limits of perception. In those moments, it becomes clear that understanding is not always about reasoning. It is about being present, observing, and participating in a network of living relationships. The bond with a dog is more than companionship. It is a lesson in how life itself can communicate, perceive, and share understanding across species boundaries. It is an invitation to see the world as a web of connected minds where emotions ripple outward and perception is collective. In this relational space, the universe is not a collection of isolated objects, but a dynamic, intertwined reality alive with sentience and responsiveness. Next time your dog nudges you when you are sad or curls up beside you when you are anxious, recognize that this is not a coincidence. It is the product of thousands of years of co-evolution. Thousands of generations in which dogs and humans shaped each other's behavior, perception, and understanding. It is the result of an intricate dance of biology, chemistry, and experience woven over millennia into the fabric of both species. Every sniff, every glance, every tail wag is part of a communication network that transcends words and bridges the boundaries between minds. This is where science and philosophy intersect. On one level, what your dog does can be measured: heart rates, hormone levels, facial expressions, Neural activation. We can trace patterns, study reactions, and map behavior. On another level, what your dog does cannot be fully explained. The subjective experience of perceiving your emotions, the intuitive decisions made in milliseconds, the predictions of your next movement, all of this exists in a domain we can observe but never entirely inhabit. It is a reminder that reality is not limited to the human perspective. There is richness beyond what we can see, touch, or calculate, and dogs give us a window into it. The relationship with a dog also challenges our assumptions about intelligence. Humans often equate intelligence with reasoning, language, or conscious thought. Dogs suggest a different model: intelligence as sensitivity, as pattern recognition, as relational attunement. Their understanding does not rely on words or abstract concepts. Instead, it emerges from interaction, from the integration of multiple sensory streams, from prediction and from response. In other words, intelligence can be embodied and relational rather than solely cognitive. This also reframes how we think about the boundaries of consciousness. Awareness is often assumed to reside entirely within one brain, contained and isolated. But the bond with a dog shows that consciousness, perception, and influence can be distributed. Your mood affects your dog. Your dog's response affects you. Together, you create a shared emotional environment, a living network of perception that transcends individual minds. In this sense, reality itself is relational. The world is not simply objects in space or chemical reactions in isolation. It is a web of interacting consciousnesses, each shaping and reflecting the others. Perhaps the most profound lesson is one about humility and curiosity. We often believe that we are the ultimate measure of understanding, the center of conscious experience. Yet dogs show us that comprehension can take forms that are subtle, relational, and extraordinary. They perceive patterns we cannot, predict outcomes before we act, and influence the world in ways we barely notice. They remind us that reality is bigger than our perceptions, more interconnected than we assume, and richer than our models can capture. Science gives us the tools to observe, measure, and understand part of this phenomenon, but it also teaches us to respect what remains mysterious. The fact that dogs can read emotions so accurately is not just a testament to evolution, biology, and learning. It is a window into the deep, relational fabric of life. It is proof that perception, understanding, and intelligence are not confined to humans nor to individual brains, but emerge in connection. When you sit with your dog, notice this: you are part of a shared reality, a network of signals, responses, and awareness. You are participating in a conversation without words, a subtle dance that bridges species. In these moments, reality becomes something living, dynamic, and relational. The universe is not only made of matter and energy, it is made of connection, perception, and shared experience. Your dog is not just a companion. They are a teacher showing you a glimpse of what it means for life to be truly aware, truly relational, and astonishingly alive.